And we're live. Live, all the way live. No jive. Hello and welcome to Astro Lunatic's Guide to the Universe. I am Susan, aka Astro Luna Chick. What's going on, guys? I got Lynn and Dave in the chat room. My two favorite listeners. My diehards. Thanks, guys, for being here. Dave's on the road, traveling, and Lynn is holding down the West Coast in an undisclosed location. How are you guys? How's everybody out there? All of you listening who are not in the chat room. I was a good girl today and I posted my announcement that I was going live on Facebook and the app formerly known as Twitter. I didn't get over to Instagram because that takes a little bit more creativity on my part. I like to be a little more like artsy with my posts, and I didn't really have time. You guys were waiting, and I had to pee, obviously, before getting on the air, but here I am. Showing up with bells on. Thank you all for joining me. If you do not know, I am Astro Lunatic, and you can find me obviously here on YouTube. I'm on Rumble. I have a Facebook page, Instagram, and X, which I'm still getting used to saying, and anywhere where you search for Astro Lunatic. I have a gilded chat page, which is like Discord, but as true to its name, Discord has created too much discord, and it seems to me that gilded is the way to go, considering its reference to gold, and Discord is Eris, the goddess of discord, which we might talk a little bit about today. Eris. Eris being a variant, but Eris also being an asteroid, which is conjunct the North Node and close to particular eclipse points that we'll be talking about today. So, I'm glad you all could join me. Where else can you find me? If you're interested in getting a reading, or if you just want to say hello, you can email me at astrolunachick@gmail.com. And I also have a Google Voice line, which is the Astro Lunatic hotline. And that is 914-222-1231. You can call me, text me, leave a voicemail. Be nice. Don't be naughty. Don't make me block you. Okay? Yeah. So, hey now. Hey now. Lynn, right? Discord. See, what is in a name? It's important. And as I talked a little bit about the other day about names and symbolisms, I mean, I talk a lot about that, obviously, because when I'm talking about the, let's say, the asteroids, um, a lot of them literally will show up as their actual name. So, um, it's important. Symbols and looking into the meanings metaphorically, you can gain a lot of information. And in a day and age where some things we cannot put out there directly and spell it out in, in literal terms, sometimes we have to read between the lines. So, uh, I mean, that's a skill that is developed when you start to study things of an esoteric nature. You learn that what's on the surface is the exoteric, exo being outside, above ground, and then the esoteric is hidden beneath the surface. And it takes a level of abstract thinking to be able to understand what's being said. Yes, as Lynn says in the chat, etymology, the etymological dictionary, right? That's what I love about the fixed stars. And that's why I'm always reading from Constellation of Words, because it is the most thorough compendium of information that I've found. And even then, I've only scratched the surface, because eventually I'm going to obviously want to dig even deeper than that, because what am I reading? I'm reading someone else's research. It's not mine, right? But I'm sharing with you the resource that I have learned from, and yet still reading from someone's material who is quoting someone else's material who is referencing the ancients. And even at that level, we only have a slight understanding of what that might even have meant for them at the time. Our modern comprehension of what an ancient scribe was trying to write down and convey could only really be seen in the context of their understanding, which we don't really know. Or maybe it's there, but those who have deciphered such writings and scriptures and ancient documents, we're still only getting their interpretation of it. But as I have found in my own experience, I have been able to get a sense of some of the, perhaps, the flavor of the ancient meanings. And I don't know if that's due to, you know, cellular genetic memory of having been there and participated in some things, or a reincarnational perspective. I don't know. I just know that there is some sort of a visceral understanding when I've looked at certain materials. It's rung a bell, it's resonated, and that's all I can say. Yes, safe travels to Dave, who is getting back on the road again. Dave can't wait to get back on the road again. Enjoy your vacation, Dave. You well deserve it. Okay, back to the astrology. So before I came on today, I was doing a little research, as I do every day, breaking it down and looking back upon last fall of 2022, the set of eclipses that we had, and then forward to the 2023 eclipses in the spring, and looking at some interesting degrees. Now, the thing with eclipses is the reason why that particular degree of an eclipse, astrologers will say, well, the effects of this eclipse will probably go about 6 months, and another one might be more exact, so it might have a, they would say, it has a longer term of effect. However, um, I like to look at the transits to that degree. So if there's an eclipse that happens on a planet, the degree of a planet in your chart, and there are events that are triggered or come in correlation, I wouldn't say that the eclipses and aspects trigger events. I would say there is an equal correlation as above, so below. So, I mean, let's say I had an eclipse on my sun. Um, that would make the degree of my sun sensitive anytime there was a subsequent transit to that degree. I would have stuff coming up, obviously, um, for years to come. So eclipses, they make their mark, and then, they my my view of it is they keep on giving because they keep on peeling off layers of that part of ourselves that has been impacted by the eclipse. So to just say that an eclipse effect is going to last for 6 months, um, I think it would be more accurate to say that the storyline and theme of the events that are happening change every 6 months, or that it's added to. So, or we could look at it as a 1 year cycle divided into 6 months. Um, but I think it would also be a better and more accurate interpretation to look at it in terms of where the nodes of the moon are located, because that's the the sign that is going to be impacted, the area of your chart, and to look at the eclipses as the nodes transit backwards through your chart through that sign, and then look at the storyline. Because if you have a north node eclipse on your sun, and then you have let's say a Pluto transit, isn't that going to last a lot longer for you than you know, oh, 6 months it'll be over? No, it fucking won't be over. So I don't, I like to take things on a case by case basis, and you should too. And with that being said, everyone should get a copy of their chart, whether you go to astro.com and put your birth details in and um, plot the points. It's not really that hard to do. If you need me to walk you through it, if you need me to send you a copy of your chart, I will do that. Um, I don't, that's not a reading. I don't charge for that. If you want to know how to read your own chart, we could do coaching sessions, or if you just want a reading, that's fine. But if you just want a copy of your chart, I mean, everyone should have it. So it's just, people get overwhelmed when they look at their chart. They're like, holy shit, where do I even begin? That's why it's so difficult to learn astrology, and that's why so many people who call themselves occultists, esotericists, re- researchers, whatever, people who write and speak about magic, yada yada, a lot of them have never learned astrology, which I think is a shame, and it's a reflection of the instant gratification and laziness of our culture. Um, if you just don't have an aptitude for it, then that's fine. Have someone else look at it. But it's so important, especially nowadays, because it gives us an edge. So, with that said, let's talk about astrology. So the last we are okay, so if we're looking at the big 1 year cycle, the last set of eclipses we had last year in the fall, the solar eclipse on October 25th, that was at 3 degrees of Scorpio, conjunct to Venus. So the sun, the moon, and Venus, 3 degrees of Scorpio. Look back to see where you were at that time and what was going on, uh, and where it fell in your chart, and all of the events that happen, let's say, subsequent to that. Um, we're wrapping up a cycle that was triggered by that eclipse. So everything that's happened within a year, the journey, everything you've learned, whatever, whatever, uh, the culmination of that cycle is happening with the lunar eclipse that's coming up. So the lunar eclipse will be on October 28th with the full moon at 5 degrees of Taurus. Now, the eclipses that happened last fall, we had the nodes of the moon, North Node and South Node, in Taurus and Scorpio. So all of the eclipses really were happening in Taurus and Scorpio. And then with the movement, with the solar eclipse this past April 20th, was the first eclipse that we had in Aries. Prior to that, we had the eclipses in Scorpio and in Taurus. So this lunar eclipse, now lunar eclipses, as all full moons, signify a peak, a culmination, an ending of sorts. Not really an ending, but in terms of eclipses and in terms of this one, it is the closing of a cycle. So, even though the moon's nodes are in Aries and Libra, um, not all eclipses are exactly conjunct the north or the south node. They can be a few degrees apart. It's just that when we have a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse, um, close or well, really a new moon or a full moon, close to the nodes of the moon, that's when we have eclipses. So it's significant that we have this lunar eclipse at 5 degrees of Taurus while the north node is in Aries. So it does bring back some of the themes of the solar eclipse that occurred last fall. So we had on October 25th, we had that solar eclipse of last year, 25th. And then 2 weeks later, we had a full moon, a lunar eclipse around 15. That would have been early November, 15 degrees of Taurus. So think back to that time. What was going on? What was changing? That would have had a lot to do with our physical resources and stability, um, our self-worth, uh, the things that we own, because that's Taurus, that's physical assets. But it also has to do with self-worth and um, physicality, being in a physical body, but also with the South Node in Scorpio, then we would have issues around perhaps uh, joint finances and resources, and perhaps the issues surrounding our close relationships, whether it's family or partner, married, romantic, whatever, and sharing resources, or just the idea of um, what our values are around that. And it would have brought up issues in that area of life. And the other thing is, there were a lot of issues coming up around Scorpio stuff with the South Node there. Um, it would have been bringing up addictions, psychological patterns, um, mm, maybe like the need for perhaps some therapy, personal therapy, one on one, or family therapy, looking at the family dynamic as it relates to terms of like trust issues and money, also sex and cheating, and um, not that it would have happened, but like things could have happened to trigger people's issues. And again, all very individual, very personal. I'm just giving you a broad view, right? So we're in a different phase now. However, like I said, this lunar eclipse is going to pretty much close out that cycle for us. So, um, whatever we've learned, or in whatever way we were able to look at our patterns in all of the themes that I've discussed, um, in terms of the resources and sharing, or, the need for physical, physical intimacy. Though a lot of that stuff came up as it relates to our relationships, and so whatever people were going through. So you may, I mean, we might have an event that happens that either brings back a recollection of that cycle, or a repeat, or understanding where we could repeat a cycle. We're being told very clearly that that stuff is done, that cycle is done. Don't repeat the cycle. Don't go back to the past. That doesn't mean necessarily not going back to the past in terms of like, don't talk to anybody from the past that relates to whatever the struggle was that you're going through in that cycle. It's not like that. It's that also what will happen is that if you've allowed the transformation to happen through this cycle, you're a different person. So going back into an environment, a dynamic, um, a job, not necessarily a job, but like trying to go back to something that didn't work in terms of, um, if you know that you're repeating a dynamic with people. So, I mean, that can be really, sometimes that's hard to say, but where you'll see it is where it just doesn't work. Um, it's the kind of thing where if you try to go back to something that you've outgrown, um, immediately you'll see the discordance. So at this point in time, what we really have is a crossing over where we're leaving that cycle behind, even though eclipses, let's say when the eclipses were happening in Taurus and Scorpio, um, and now we have the nodes in Aries and Libra, we're still kind of in the process of releasing the past. And that's kind of how it works. But as we have the the planets going over the south node, now we get into more of, you know, um, taking what we've learned and really putting into action the transformation that's happened already within because we have Pluto squaring the nodes. So the nodes are at 25 Aries and Libra. Pluto is at 28 and of Capricorn and just went direct. So the long, I don't know, 5-month cycle where Pluto was retrograde was where we get a chance to sort of go back over certain things from the past, let's say, and we're given one last look, um, and also sort of a preview of the crumbling structure in terms of, I mean, we have to look at it in terms of society because Pluto is one of the outer planets. So, although it's happening, let's say personally, if it's affecting your chart by degree, and because Pluto is in a chart, a house somewhere in your chart, that's where the big transformation is happening. But it is more of like, it's how you're being affected by the larger changes in society where our structure is and our system is crumbling. And we can see that for sure. Um, but as we have the sun on the south node and then Mercury going over the south node, then we have only Venus really is the personal, the only real personal planet that's on the other side of the nodes. So we still are working with Venus on a personal level, but once the Sun and Mercury cross over the South Node, then it becomes transpersonal. What does that mean? So the first 6 houses of the chart are personal. That's your personal inner experience, your personal life. It's about you and everything in your environment that you go through. But once you hit the seventh house, and Libra is the seventh sign, it is about the other. So we get to sort of live our experience out more in terms of our relationships. So, in terms of the inner and outer world, we're more l- likely to be observing things happening in the political arena, the on the national level, the global level. If you notice, every time around this time of year, when we have a large concentration of planets in Libra, things get more um, externalized. There's more going out, in that arena. There's a reason for that. It's the cycles of the planets. So, um, today we have Mercury making that in conjunct to Uranus. an uncomfortable realization or change or realization of change or a change in communication or the way we think. And it is influenced by the external changes that are happening in our world, the instability. Um, Now, let's talk more about that eclipse degree of the solar eclipse that happened on the 14th, because I'm still not done with that. I am still chewing on it, and I really didn't get to it on Sunday because I just talked about the weekly transits. And again, I apologize. No more 3-hour shows. This is just ridiculous. I mean, I try to listen back on my shows and I'm like, I just can't. I don't know who could sit there and listen to me for 3 hours. It's not right. It's going to change. I know I repeat myself. I rabbit trail. I go back and forth. If anybody can even follow it, I think it's actually my progressed Mercury is retrograde. Ah, I got to see when it goes direct. It's soon. I know it is. So it's a lot of hashing and rehashing, and I can't listen to it. I could listen to about an hour of myself and then I lose it. But whatever, I hope somebody's getting something out of it. So, and if anything, it's helping me to gather my thoughts and to be able to convey things in a more succinct and understandable manner. Okay, so let me go back to my notes. And as I was looking at the 22nd degree of Libra, the 22nd degree of any sign is resonant to the 10th house. So I did talk about that in a previous show. Why is that? Because every degree, 1 through 12, relates to the 12 zodiac signs, and then it starts over again. So the 24th degree would be a 12th house. Like the 12th degree is a 12th house resonance. So the 22nd minus 12 minus 22 minus 12, we get 10. So that's a little bit of where I'm going with that. And I talked about the 10th house being the leader, the dad, the father, the masculine, the Capricorn sort of vibration of leadership. What does it mean to step into leadership and the public eye? Also, what's going on with our leaders? They're losing their minds. um, so I was looking at that degree, and then it brought me to, well, that's Libra, right? And that's tropical zodiac. But in terms of the stars, the the star at 22 degrees of Libra is Hezi, um, the star Hezi in the constellation of Virgo. So Virgo, if we look at Virgo, Virgo the Virgin is representative of every female deity, let's say in whatever pantheon. Okay, uh, it is the male masculine deities are solar, representing the sun, and the feminine deities are lunar. So, in the constellation of Virgo, this particular star is located below the girdle of the Virgin. So, that area of the body obviously relates to the reproductive organs and the birth canal. Also, in mythology, Virgo is represented by the story of Origone. So there's two different mythologies of Origone. One of them, the one that I'm going to point out, is that so Origone, um, at the loss of her father, she was in grief. She hung herself. Her father was Icarus. So I won't dive too much into it, but there's also like two different stories about Icarus. Icarus, I think the most popular and well-known story about Icarus is flying too close to the sun and getting burned, that kind of thing. But with Origone, so Origone was his daughter, and she hung herself because of the loss of her father, so was placed in the stars in memory as a constellation. And it is also, Virgo is also associated with the goddess Astraea. Now, I've talked about the asteroid Astraea, which is in Cancer right now. And Astraea was the daughter of one of the Titans. And in a nutshell, her story was that she sided with the gods against her own father. So it's interesting to point out the theme of father-daughter, um, and Astraea, in terms of Astraea, and Astraea, as I've talked about with the asteroid, her theme is justice. So in terms of Astraea, this is she sided with the Titans. No, she was sorry, daughter of one of the Titans. So there were the gods of Mount Olympus, and then the Titans were part human, part god. Where do we hear that story, right? So that makes us think of the story of um, the Anunnaki, let's say, and the Nephilim, right? The Nephilim of the the Bible, the fallen angels, the oh, I don't know if you want to call them human alien hybrids, and that particular bloodline. This is what is being represented in this mythology, is this idea of humans mixing, gods mixing with humans, right? So her father was part god, part human as a Titan, and she sides with the gods against her own father because of the uh, because she was on the side of justice and she saw whatever she saw, going on with her father, she didn't agree with it. So she sided with divinity over human law, let's say. So it's sort of that idea of man-made law versus divine law or natural law. So that is interesting. Other things of interesting note that we can associate with the constellation of Virgo. Virgo, in Kabbalism, Virgo constellation is associated with the number 3 tarot card, the Empress. What do we see with the Empress, right? She is visibly pregnant with child. So it is the idea of the female principle and the birthing, reproduction, fertility, and the Empress card has the symbol for Venus right on the card. So again, it tells us that we're looking at Venus. Um, Virgo is also associated with Ceres, the goddess Ceres, who was the goddess of the harvest and whose symbol was the sheaf of wheat. What we see in the depiction of Virgo constellation is her holding the um, the sheaf of wheat. Now, if we go on to look more at Oregone, quote, reigned with justice and fled when it was lost to sinful greed and corruption. So this shows us that the constellation of Virgo is associated with the laws of the state, legal code, keepers of hallowed temples of the gods. So it is associated with state and church. And again, I'll call your attention to the fact that I'm talking about the constellation of Virgo, which lies behind the tropical zodiac sign of Libra. Okay. And particularly this star, Heze, which is in the girdle, below the girdle of the Virgin, at 22 degrees. So Virgo, again, qualities, attributes, mental training, education, financial reporting, investigation. It's known for its charm and, its communicative abilities, verbal acuity, discernment, investigation, uncovering hidden things. It's also known for stenography. So as I was reading the description on constellation of words, what it was basically was describing, it didn't say stenography, um, but it talked about the use of letters as symbols. So that's stenography. But it's also, um, in the Hebrew, we're talking about Kabbalism, right? And the use of letters as symbols, and also in, um, let's say, Chinese or Japanese writing, those characters. Did I lose it? Okay, I lost the stream there. Did you guys lose me? I'm still here. Are you guys still here? We are still streaming. I just noticed that the screen was blank. Blah. I've been having trouble with my internet, and I think it's my VPN sometimes. Okay, you guys didn't lose me. That's cool. All right, so where was I? Yeah, so letters as symbols. So it's this idea that symbols convey not just in words, but a meaning, a deep, esoteric meaning that is not on the surface. And it also is the idea that symbols are interpreted by the unconscious. And evoke certain reactions and feelings that we're unaware of because it's so primal. Um, I know that uh, y- there is a lot of information and people who talk about hidden symbols, who point them out in corporate logos and in Hollywood and stuff like that. And all of that is very fascinating. But I have yet to see, maybe it's behind a paywall, but um so for so many years I've been watching people point this stuff out and doing my own research and understanding things from as I do from the astrological perspective. I've learned a lot. And uh just to throw it out there, like, oh, look, it's the eye on top of the pyramid and Illuminati and blah, 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 blah. Um, I I often wonder, it's like, all right, so do you even know what it means? Do they even know what it means? They're still just pointing it out. I mean, that's like, I mean, I could point out, runes, in terms of Nordic symbolism, the Nordic whatever, the runic alphabet, but if I don't know what it means, then I'm full of shit. So, um yeah, I don't know, that's something that kind of sticks in my craw, that there's lots of researchers, quote researchers, or people like that like to point out the esoteric symbolism. Look, it's an esoteric symbol. Um It doesn't mean anything anymore because they don't know what it means. And they want to write books using other people's research and just regurgitate the same shit other people are saying without actually even applying it to their own life and, you know, getting any kind of any whatever personal benefit out of it. I don't know. Sorry. I'll stop ranting. Just a personal pet peeve. Because I wanted to learn and I kept seeing this shit thrown out there like, ooh, look, here's another Illuminati symbol. And then after doing my own research, I said, you know what, motherfuckers? I am Illuminati. You don't know what Illuminati means. Stop pointing it out as if it was bad. These things are not bad. They're not bad or good, but that's the way humans are in our polarized thinking until we integrate our right and left brain. We don't we're always looking for where are the bad guys? Who are the bad guys? Who are these people using these symbols? What are they all about? Um, what is it about? It's about triggering something deep in the human psyche that is buried, uh, that we have not made conscious yet. And so we will be swayed by it, used by it, abused by it, led by it, because it's unconscious. We don't know what it is. We don't understand. Anyway, I digress. Where was I going? Okay, let's get back to the star. Heze. Origone. Okay. Virgo. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Steganography came to mind if you're a follower and watcher of the dark journalist shows, he talks a lot about that. He talks about it in terms of um, the X steganography, the X steganography, and that is the X being the symbol or marking that would relate to anything to do with extraterrestrials or uh, black projects, secret, above top secret type stuff, um, would be labeled under X, X technology. And where do we see that, right? SpaceX. Now Twitter is X. I talked about the the Grand Cross this past summer, and that was when Twitter became X. X also relates, as far as I have seen in um, with astrology, also when you're talking about the the grand cross of the cardinal signs, the seasons, but even longer cycles having to do with what we would consider to be the Kali Yuga. Like, I think we're coming out of the Kali Yuga, right? The yugas being long-term cycles, coming out of the Kali Yuga, which is like a total descent into matter, and then we slowly begin to ascend, like we hit rock bottom and then start to go back up. And all of that has to do with the celestial cycles of our solar system, our galaxy, all around the galactic center, where we believe um, our solar system or galaxy originated from. The Milky Way. We will get to that. Actually, that was kind of important. Let me see. I just want to make sure that I think I have that in my notes, that that was in the star lore mythology. The Milky Way. What was it? What was it? Hang on. Milky Way. I suppose I will come back upon it. I know I read it. I wrote it down somewhere. That's how I remember things. That's how I got like straight A's in school. My notes were copious and impeccable. As long as I wrote something down, I would remember it because it was part of my my photographic memory. Oh, I know. I wrote it down here somewhere about the Milky Way. What was it? I think it had something to do with. No, let me not say it because I don't remember. Let me not say it. Milky Way. Mm, I'm sorry. Boring pause. Silence. The Milky Way. Fuck. Where did I have that written down? Hmm. No, 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 no. All right, whatever. I'll figure it out. But back to Virgo. Now, Virgo in our current, let's say, religious ideologies relates to the Virgin Mary, which in ancient times, virgin meant something quite different from a woman who was unspoiled, unsullied, never touched. Um, so Mary being connected to now Virgo. So we're seeing a theme here. I'm sorry, I'm still I have to find it now. I'm obsessed. Where the hell did I write it? The Milky Way. Like I could picture it. It's in the bottom right-hand corner of one of my fucking pages here, and it meant something. Damn it. Ah, here it is. I found it. Okay. Yeah. The Milky Way is representative of the smoke from the altar, and the altar being, well, in terms of Mount Olympus, the gods lit a fire on Mount the gods of Mount Olympus lit a fire on their altar to celebrate the defeat of the Titans, gods versus Nephilim, I guess, and to swear allegiance to Zeus, Jupiter, Zeus being the same, Jupiter, another name for Zeus, just Roman versus Greek. And the smoke from the altar is the Milky Way. Now, somewhere in the heavens and the celestials, in that particular area of the sky, we have the constellation Ara. And just to make a note, on the 19th, this is why this is important. I don't know what it means, but I'm just making note of it. The moon will be passing through the degrees of Sagittarius, which relate to the constellation Ara. So Ara represents the altar, the fire, and the sacrifice. What do we associate with sacrifice? In the Bible, it was called Holocaust. What have we seen lately but burnt offerings? And I said the 19th would be an important day, and that's because it is a 9 day. I don't know what we'll say. I'm just pointing it out and letting you know the moon is going to be passing through Ara, that is an altar, sacrifice, and Ara, the stars in Ara are 19 to 20 degrees of Sagittarius and 25 to 26 degrees of Sagittarius, which the sign of Sagittarius and those particular degrees make a square aspect to tropical Virgo. And 20 degrees, roughly, really it was 21, that was the Mercury station retrograde. It makes a trine also to Venus's, the Venus star point, retrograde conjunction with the sun, important degree. And if we're looking at 25 to 26 degrees of Sagittarius, that is called galactic center. So, expect news from galactic center. Expect the gods to respond, I suppose, to whoever's making the sacrifice. Because the burnt offering, the smoke is supposed to reach the nose of the gods, and they're pleased or they're not pleased. I think. Very interesting. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Um, Now, the reason why I think that's also important, the moon, I know it's just the moon and it's a temporary, like a 1 day transit as the moon moves very quickly, but the moon will be making aspects to Mercury. It'll be sextile to Mercury and the sun and the south node from those degrees of Sagittarius. Uh, and it will be square to that retrograde Mercury point and its station, direct and retrograde. But also, um, the star, one of the stars in the constellation of, no, sorry, I wanted to say Virgo. It's at 27 degrees of Virgo, but it's in the constellation of Ursa Major. Now, the star is called Al-Qaid. Al-Qaid. What does that sound like? Al-Qaeda? Yep. Um, it's spelled Alkid. And this particular star in ancient astrology, in Islamic astrology, is known as destroyer of nations. Interesting, then I just noticed that it is in the constellation of Ursa Major, and Ursa Major is the greater bear. So there's the lesser bear and the greater bear, and their tails pretty much point to the pole star, and these constellations revolve around the pole star. But what what country does the bear symbolize? Russia, right? Interesting. Um, it's whatever. I'm not even a political commentary. I'm just giving you the correlations. Okay. So this star, Al Qaid, at 27 degrees of Virgo, is opposite to Neptune. What have I been saying about Neptune and those degrees that it's at in Pisces and the asteroids that it's been hanging out with, right? Clotho, Fate, one of the three fates, Clotho, Pandora, Boracisi, Pandora, Pandora's box, Boracisi being, um, I mean, just in a nutshell, it's religious delusions and lies, you know, what we tell ourselves, what we believe in order to be happy and not face the truth, right? I mean, this would be like saying, okay, I mean, but we're talking about religion, so we're talking about mass delusion, mass deception. Um, we're talking about religious cults. I mean, there's so much coming out right now. Um, People speaking out who have been in these cults, particular cults, and the things that I was listening to an interview with a cult survivor, and they were asked, like, what was, you must have been told how to respond, right? Because that's the brainwashing and programming. You must have been told how to respond when people would confront you with, like, your beliefs don't make sense. This doesn't seem healthy. And they were fed lines. Like, people will confront you and they will challenge you. with the truth that would try to break your faith or your delusion, but this is what you got to say. And you just keep repeating that. That's Borosisi. And I don't want to look it up right now, but there's a Sabian symbol. I think it's at 25 degrees of Pisces, or it could be 28, 29 degrees. It's one of them. I know it's there because my Chiron is at 25 Pisces and my ascendant is at 28 Pisces. So I know it's one of them. And I've dealt with this. And the Sabian symbol has to do with it's called purging of the priesthood. And I mean, that's been part of my personal mythology of going through, being part of a belief system, a religion, uh, trying to understand the dogma that was being handed to me to say, this is what we believe, and you are a part of us, and you know, don't challenge the narrative, and as opposed to what my mind was hearing and being told to believe, it was as opposed to what my heart and my intuition and the true Holy Spirit within me that said, oh, wait, no, this doesn't feel right. And then my mind would say, why doesn't this feel right? I need to know why. If you're telling me X plus Y equals Z, I got to know why. If you don't explain to me why, then I can't make an educated choice if it doesn't make sense to me. And so, having never gotten straight answers about anything, um, you know, just believe, take it on faith. The Bible is true because the Bible says it's true. um, I mean, that's just me, and that's why I have developed the thought process that I have, and have learned the things that I've learned because I wanted to know why. And if no one could tell me why, then I need to know why other people believe what they do. And then I have to make a critical, a decision based on critical thinking, which is very simple. Jesus said, I could even quote it back at them. Jesus said, you'll know them by their fruits. So, what are the fruits? What are the fruits of the actions? What's the actual outcome? Input, output. If it's harmful, if it doesn't bring peace, love, joy, kindness, etc., then it's no good. Anyway, digressing. Purging of the priesthood. That is this degree that um, uh, Neptune in Pisces has been going over back and forth at the last like 5 degrees of Pisces, 5 degrees or so. And it's been a long time. And I want to say, I don't know, 5 years. But what have we seen come out? So much information that was hidden that we didn't know about other people's religious beliefs. Not all religion is bad. It's when you take things to extreme and when the quote priesthood becomes corrupted, and when you realize that there's no real separation of church and state, right? Not really. Um, all roads lead to Rome. Where's the Vatican? Yeah. So, Virgo, the constellation of Virgo, and the and tropical Virgo being opposite to Pisces, Virgo is the purification, and it's also the actual physical results of the shadow of Pisces, right? So Pisces is the spiritual, intangible, and then Virgo is trying to live it out, living out this like perfect reflection of whatever their whatever the spiritual beliefs are. It is fundamentalism. Anyway, um the sun and the south node of the moon and Mercury are both making an in conjunct to Neptune in Pisces, and everything that I just discussed is coming out. The moon will square, which means make a 90-degree angle. So, um, it's squaring to Neptune. So on the 19th, I expect it's something having to do with the rise of religious extremism, and you will get to see uh, people's belief systems. Because obviously, what's happening right now, people are picking sides. You know, you're either on one side or you're on the other, but the average person doesn't understand shit about either of those sides, right? I kind of talked about in my last show, I talked a lot about Israel and the difference between Ashkenazi and Sephardic peoples, right? Or Semitic. Well, Semitic. I think I said Seph- I might have mixed up Sephardic and Semitic when I was referring to a lot of the Arab world being Semitic. I don't know if I said Sephardic, but Sephardic has to do with the actual genetic descendants of those peoples as opposed to Ashkenaz. And those particular people groups having their roots with what we consider to be like the ancient gods and the Anunnaki and that whole story. We need to understand that. But what I'm more leaning towards today is talking about going back to Sumeria, because what I'd like to point out is that in every ancient culture, we have the representation of the goddess in Virgo. All right, so um, well, we talked about Origone, we talked about Estrella. So these are really, when you talk about the quote goddess, we have lots of goddess characters. They represent the feminine, right? But these are the feminine aspects of God, whereas the masculine characters and the solar deities are the masculine aspects of God. Um, and then throughout the ages, we have the same goddess characters, um, but with different names. So mm, I know, like a lot of quote esoteric researchers will throw these names around and say, "Oh, that's the goddess Astarte, and that's the goddess Columbia." and the Statue of Liberty is the goddess Columbia. And then another one disagrees and says it's a different goddess. All right, so I really just want to clarify that particular what it correlates to and what does it mean? Who's the goddess, right? We have probably, I would say, and I could be wrong, um, in the earliest cultures, I think that we have the earliest known writings of ancient peoples would be in Sumeria. So I guess we should start with Inanna. So Inanna, um, you might know the name from the Sumerian tablets, the Sumerian writings, and that would bring you to Enki and Enlil, right? Um, which many have associated uh, to in the Hebrew writings of um, Yahweh and Jehovah. Now, Christians or Jews probably will tell you those are two different names for God, but I don't think so. I think because when we see the word Elohim, that is actually a plural. You don't have like there's no real reference to a one God. The actual writings talk about gods. Okay, so you hear a lot about Enki and Enlil, but Inanna was the goddess figure in that story of the Sumerian times. And I'll go into that a little bit, but let me just talk about, of course, I'm flipping through my notes. Um, the names of the goddess through time. The feminine, well, like we really only up until the Abrahamic religions, we in all of the pantheons, we always had gods and goddesses. It's really only up until the Abrahamics that we have really only, a male god figure and what is actually the feminine aspect of God just being kind of referred to as, yeah, that's Mary, that's Jesus' mother. She was a virgin. And there's Mary Magdalene over there, and she's a whore until the Catholic Church says, oh, by the way, we made a mistake. She's not a whore. A prostitute. But even now, you have to look in the context of our understanding. What is a prostitute now? And what was a prostitute? What were the temple prostitutes? And what was a virgin? Totally different meanings. All right. So, okay. So in the Sumerian uh, religion, let's say, it was the goddess Inanna. And Inanna and all of the goddesses, just as a side note, uh, were associated with the temple, the keeping of the temple, the worship, but what it had to do with, and that's why I kind of referenced temple prostitutes. These were sexual rites. Now, I think I might have heard that one interpretation of Sumerian tablets was, or I don't know where I might have heard it, but that reproduction was not willy-nilly. Get it, Willy? Um, uh, it was overseen by the religious leaders of the day. Like there was a quote cult of the goddess where, you know, couples wouldn't just copulate on their own, which makes me think that there was selective breeding. But anyway, um, and the goddess figure was the central figure in those particular temple rites. So, okay, so in Ugaritic we have Ashtart. I'm telling you the names because it's different names, same goddess. In Babylonian, it was Ishtar, Phoenician, Astarte, which makes me think of Ashtar command, right? Astarte, Ashtart, Ashtar. Interesting. I'm not saying it's good or bad or validating it. I'm just telling you etymologically, this is where the root is. Okay. In Greek, we had Aphrodite and Athena. Now, Aphrodite being the goddess of love and fertility and such things. And Athena was a goddess of war, right? Pallas Athena was a feminine war deity. So you could call her a solar feminine, which, like, I don't know if this is a recognized thing, but I guess. I mean, I never read it anywhere, but it seems obvious to me that if you look at the pantheon of goddesses, you have solar and lunar goddesses. So the feminine aspect and the goddesses being lunar and the masculine being solar, even within that, you have feminine, masculine, like feminine deities, goddesses, or you have feminine male deities. Wrap your head around that. Because masculine and feminine doesn't have to do with your reproductive parts or your roles in society. I mean, it does, but that's exoteric. I'm giving you the esoteric, the hidden, the truth within the truth. All right, so in Roman times, we have Venus, Minerva. I think Columbia was also Roman, and Columbia is representing her symbol is the dove. Um, Now going back to Inanna, so in all of the pantheons, we have we always have the masculine and the feminine counterpart and their story. So a lot of times they were brother and sister or twin. So Inanna's twin was Utu, later called Shamash in the Hebrew pantheon language iteration of the god and goddess mythology, but Shamash. I didn't go into Shamash. I did not research into the Hebrew version of Utu as Shamash, but what does that sound like? Hamas? Yeah. And Utu, Inanna's twin, was the sky god. So what you'll notice in mythology is you have the sky god is always representative of the sun, and that's the masculine day principle, whereas the feminine is the lunar night, you know, dark goddess. Well, we have light. We do have light goddess and we do have dark goddess, and I'll get into why that is. So, Inanna's story in Inanna's story, we have it's very similar to the story of Persephone, where she descends into the underworld and has to pass through seven gates. What does that remind you of? Seven chakras. So, in passing of each at each gate, she has to give something up. And if you read the story, she's giving up her jewelry, her earrings, her necklace, her bracelet, whatever. Um, but the seven gates are very significant, and it relates to the cycle of Venus. So, in all of these mythologies, the goddess is representative of the planet Venus. So, if we understand the cycle of Venus, um, Venus has its morning star and its evening star phase. And the Venus star points are the Venus conjunctions to the sun. And we had one that occurred at 20 to 21 degrees of Leo. I don't remember the date, but that would have been, I think, in August. And the seven gates related to Inanna has to do with her descending into the underworld. Okay, so what does that mean? Um, when we think of the underworld, we think of the unconscious. We think of death, the darkness. It is like a death and rebirth process. But what is it? It is the morning and evening star phases of Venus. So the symbols of Venus and Inanna are, I mean, Inanna's star is the eight-pointed star, which has to do with the, I believe, the 8 year cycle of Venus, where every 8 years she has her conjunction at a particular point, and or the actually, I'm not totally certain on the details. I'm just going kind of off the association with the eight, and I know that that has to do with the cycles every 8 years of Venus. So it's funny because I look back, I think it was 8 years ago, and I was looking at where Venus was retrograding in my chart, and I looked back 8 years ago, and it was at the same degrees where we had the station retrograde, and let's see, that would have been around 2015. Then maybe it was, anyway, whatever it was kind of interesting because it was like right there. It's like, damn, same degree. And looking at what I was going through at the time in my life and the transits, it was all very interesting. 2015. No, then it might have been even 8 more years before that. Anyway, whatever. It's complicated, and I won't go into it right now because I can't find it. But it had something to do with the Venus retrograde cycles and that where I was in life, and just knowing that I was wrapping up a particular cycle was kind of comforting to me because it's like, wow, I know what I was going through at that time, and it was really difficult, but I learned a lot, and I'm not the same person today because of it. So it's like, I know I don't have to repeat that kind of a cycle, is what I'm saying. Um, but anyway, getting back, um, let's see. I was looking at the time when I was researching this a few days ago, and before it was around the eclipse when I was looking at this. So, in terms of whatever I'm gleaning from this information, I'm just reading from my notes right now. But because this has to do with the eclipse, I can tell you, I'll be talking about it for a long time because this is the theme of this next 6 month cycle. Um, and I think a lot of it is very interesting. I was looking at some of the numerology because I was looking at the seven in terms of Inanna's seven gates. Um, and Venus in terms of um, the transition from evening star to morning star as she has her retrograde motion comes into conjunction with the sun, and she starts out her she was, if you look at what I mean, I'm specifically referencing to the last Venus cycle. Okay, retrograde. So she starts to go retrograde at 28 degrees of Leo. As she comes closer to the sun, because the sun enters Leo. So this is all occurring in August. And she's moving retrograde. The sun is moving forward. They converge at 20 degrees of Leo. Um, and she's invisible. And that's what is represented by the underworld journey. Let's say Inanna's descent into the underworld. And the seven gates relate to the time that Venus is invisible because it's close to the rays of the sun. You won't see it. You won't see it in the morning and you won't see it in the evening because the rays of the sun are brighter than the planet. Um, but eventually she emerges out of the shadow of the sun, and this relates to the 7 days before and after the inferior conjunction with the sun. So that's her shifting from morning star to evening star. The Persephone myth is similar in that Persephone spends half the year in the underworld, in the realm of the quote dead, the underworld, and half the year in the realm of the living. It has to do with the seasons, and it also has to do with the cycles of Venus. Now, Venus is known, as the planet goddess of love, right? Um, in her evening star phase, she does correlate more to relationships. However, in ancient astrology, in her morning star phase, she's a warrior goddess. She's the solar feminine. So, as Venus became visible um, in the morning sky, that was when we had more of a warlike vibe. So, literally, if you want to plot the seasons and the patterns of war, look at Venus. Look at the cycles of Venus. But it really does make you wonder, doesn't it? That we are on sort of a celestial time clock, and there is a season for everything, a time to reap and a time to sow. So, what else I was finding very interesting about this, and I'm just talking about one. This is everything I got from one freaking degree of one stinking eclipse. I'm only still talking about 22 degrees of Libra. Let's go back to that. That's the star Heze beneath the girdle of the Virgin of Virgo. Now, I got to thinking, as you're hearing about the eclipse, they're talking about the ring of fire. So it's the ring of fire, the glow that you see, obviously, around the sun. It's the rays of the sun coming out from behind the shadow of the moon. But well, okay, then there's also the Johnny Cash song. I didn't even look at the words of that. Well, he fell into a burning ring of fire. We know that. Um, However, if you're a female and you've ever given birth, you know that there's another meaning of the ring of fire, and that is the burning, searing pain of the stretching of the cervix. And what is located in the girdle of the Virgin? The cervix. So we are talking about the birth, the childbirth, the birthing of, well, if we look at Virgo in terms of the Virgin Mary and the story, we're talking about the birth of Christ, right? Um, it brought to mind the Vesica Pisces, where you see the two circles and the fish. And this was supposedly, I don't know if it's true, how early Christians knew one another because they used this symbol. Again, I refer you back to the meanings and the interpretations of the energy of Virgo constellation of symbols. That's why I'm saying that symbols are very important right now because of what this eclipse is triggering. It also made me think of mitochondrial DNA, and we'll come back to that. Um, and the Vesica Pisces is the part of the what we call the sacred geometry configuration of the flower of life. And what it symbolizes is cellular mitosis, right? The splitting and the multiplying of the cells as they grow after the egg is fertilized by the sperm. I don't know. I also thought about its ring of fire. So I thought of circle, cervix. I also thought of Circe, but I'm just tying it in terms of the etymology and because somebody brought up to me in conversation, brought up Circe because they were listening to a podcast and somebody was talking, I don't know who it was, somebody talking about Catholic art at the Vatican that no one's allowed to see. And he was able to see this ancient, very old artwork kept by the Vatican. but only allowed to show one of these paintings, and it was of Circe, a painting of Circe within the Catholic art collection at the Vatican. So I thought that was interesting. We'll just put that under muy interesante. So, what else can we say? Back to the symbolism of Inanna, we see the eight-pointed star, like I mentioned, also the lion, which I thought is interesting because lion is Leo, but also Leo we associate with like the Lion of Judah. Hmm. Anyway, and the rosette, which made me think of Rosalind, the rose line, and the dove. So, yeah. So Inanna and her seven gates and the Venus conjunctions. If you're interested in that, go check out Gary Caton. Gary Caton has had a podcast for many, many years. I mean, I remember listening to him, God, long fucking time ago. Probably at least 15 years, but he is an astrologer and he is one of the astrologers. There's also Ariel Gutman who talks about the Venus star points. I mean they talk very specifically about this particular cycle of Venus, but Gary talks about Inanna in terms of the Venus cycle and the descent into the underworld, and he illustrates it so beautifully. So, I always like to give props where props are due, and you know, I've learned from a lot of great people, and I have no problem mentioning and mentioning them and referring you to their work because I've just skimmed the surface. But if you want to go deeper with that, Gary Caton, check him out. Um, so let's see. I was looking at it in terms of the date and the numbers. Seven is in and seven is a notable number that would connect to Venus. Also, five, because she makes the five-pointed star with her conjunctions. And so then I kind of looked at, the numerology of the dates. So the 15th, that would have been Sunday. That was a seven, seven and seven, which I thought was significant, if we want to look at how that relates to what is going on those particular dates. And then the 14th being the day of the eclipse, that was, let's see. Well, I don't know. I was looking at 14 and redo. Oh, I know what it was. So, mm, all right. So, Kabbalistically, if you take, if you have the word, you take out the vowels, you're just left with the consonants. So, if I take the word Inanna and take out uh, the vowels, I'm left with N, N, N. N, N, N. N is the 14th letter of the alphabet. I just throwing that in there. I'm not saying it actually means anything, but it probably does. Uh, but I don't know. I didn't really get that much further into it. So let's go back to Virgo. So Virgo is depicted as the Virgin holding the sheaf of wheat. Now, this also relates to or is associated with Inanna because the um, Inanna's gate had or Inanna had a hook or knot of reeds on her gate. And I want to say, I don't know, I have this written in my notes and I'm not really sure if it's exact or if I just associated, free association, the gate of her temple. I'm just looking at because Virgo is associated with the harvest. And I looked at it as like the storehouse when you're bringing in the harvest into the storehouse so that there could be food, right, for the people. Um, so I was looking at it in terms of storehouse. I have storehouse written here. So the hook and the knot of Anana is Virgo's sheaf, and it relates to the insignia, I guess, that was on the gate, the ancient temple. I really have to make note to look at that because I'm not certain. However, so we're talking about fertility, plenty, harvest, and symbolically around this time of year, obviously agriculturally, it is the harvest time in North America. Um, but you think in terms of the harvest of everything that was done from the spring equinox to autumnal equinox. We're planting, we're sowing our seeds, we're making our efforts to build up to something, whatever it is, whatever the word, whatever we're doing, whatever, wherever our efforts are going, we see the fruits of our labor or our harvest around this time. So that got me to thinking about the eclipse that happened in April of this year. And we had the solar eclipse on 420. Um, and then we had the nodes of the moon switch signs from Taurus, Scorpio into Aries, Libra. And the degree of the eclipse, the solar eclipse in the spring, was 29 degrees of Aries. Now, where are we at right now? We're at the opposite end. We are at the opposite end, seeing the culmination, the peak of what began with that 420 eclipse. So, what began with the 420 eclipse? Well, let's look at the star. The star at paused. I don't know if you could hear me. It looked like it was rebooting. Am I on? Am I on? Am I still here? Oh my God. It's almost 2 o'clock. Did I literally almost go 2 hours already? All right. So Alrisha is in the constellation. Yes, I'm back now. Thank you, Lynn. Alrisha was the star that I was just talking about in April, last April. We had a solar eclipse at 29 degrees of Aries, which is in the constellation Pisces and on the star Alrisha. Now, the constellation of Pisces, we have uh, we have the two fishes, and they are connected by a we have let's see, they are connected by a an whatever, a cord. So there's a knot, and that is El Risha. Hang on a second. Dave says my volume is too low. What say you, Lynn? Do I need to talk louder? How about now, Dave? Can you hear me now? How about now? Lynn, am I too low? Maybe Dave needs to turn up his volume. I don't know. Oh, it's better now. Okay. Well, I did move my little boom mic, which is attached to my headphones. I moved it closer. So maybe I was mumbling. I don't know. Okay, we're good. All right. Thank you, Dave. So I was talking about the knot in the constellation of Pisces that binds the two fish together. Now, the thing about those two fishes is that they are swimming in opposite directions. Now, we have let's see, is it the eastern or western fish? Hang on a second. I think it's the northern fish. Actually, I think these guys are north and south. Anyway, um, the one fish is associated with, here it is, I got it. Okay, so this particular point, the start, was formerly the vernal equinox, like in like 122 or 111 BC. That was the vernal equinox point, but because of precession of the equinoxes, um, it is different for us now. However, uh, that's where it was. So the knot of the cord that ties the two fishes together, the fishes, obviously, when we see two, we're talking about male and female, and the the eastern fish is associated with Inanna, whereas the western fish is associated with Dumuzi. So I know um, okay, so I did say before that her twin was Utu, but another name for him in the Sumerian mythology is Dumuzi. So, so he's her quote, consort. Actually, that might be two different things. Utu might be her twin, and Dumuzi might be her consort. I am not sure. However, again, we have the masculine and the feminine. So she's the eastern fish, and east always relates to spirituality, God, our understanding and our relationship with the of divine power and our connection to the side of ourself that is not physical, let's say. So east always has to do with the spiritual and its right brain, and west, the western fish, is her consort counterpart, masculine counterpart, Dumuzi, and he represents materialism. So on some level, that eclipse in the spring being on the knot that ties them together, what would that do? I think that it could from one perspective, release them from being karmically tied to one another, or the two concepts, um, and uh, we could refer to it as like the separation of the sheep from the goats or the chaff from the wheat. Again, that's a Virgo reference, but in terms of who is souls that are ascending and souls that are descending. So that eclipse was very important. And where we're at right now is with the sun and Mercury, and we had Mars there. There is a dividing. I mean, you thought you saw the dividing before, but this is a bigger divide. So it is factions within factions, divisions within divisions, but I think that it is the culmination, obviously, of what was triggered at that eclipse on that star because it was on the knot that holds those two together, and they're swimming in different directions. We've got one going east, the other going west. One is, the spiritual path, the path of spiritual self development, the cultivating of the inner connection, our connection to our soul, understanding ourselves as a non, physical being, spark of life, and um, a fragment of the divine, as opposed to the completely materialistic Demuzi who doesn't give a crap about anything having to do with self-development. It's all about self-indulgence and, God doesn't exist and none of that matters and, do as thou wilt, be the whole of the law, etc. So we're talking about the Christ versus Antichrist. And how do we connect with Christ and spirit other than, I mean, we can't totally deny or walk away from the physical world. Um, we're still in it as long as we're in a body, right? But it's not our pursuit. It's not I say our because I think everyone listening to this stream, if you're not AI, you're on some sort of path to try to understand the nature of spirit and how to connect. Um, so I would see this eclipse as the beginning of that particular battle, where, I mean, it does talk in the Bible about, the battle of Armageddon, but it's always the battle between light and dark. And it's not one particular battle, and it's not the end of the world, but this is the emergence or the point in the movie where we start to realize that this energy is a real thing. And the Antichrist is not a person, but it is uh, the worship of materialism or the focus only on um, material gain or just the physical outward aspects of a situation, let's say. Like there's no deeper meaning, there's no hidden. Um, so that particular 420 eclipse in the spring, I think, probably broke that cord. Now, here's another interesting tidbit. I remember when Pope Francis came along, and I wanted to find out everything about him that I could. And he's very instrumental or involved in um, a devotional to Mary, uh, and you can look it up. Um, I don't know what you would call it. It's not a sect of Catholicism, but it is a path of devotion. I think that's how they might term it. Um, re- Related to Mary, and it's Mary Untier of Knots. And I thought that was very interesting that we have with these alignments and looking at Mary as being obviously the current iteration of the goddess principle, only, she's a virgin. Like she's diminished her role in the religion of Christianity, Catholicism, and Christianity. The role of Mary is skewed, you know? Um, and in the Abrahamic religions, which, that's Judaism and Christianity and Muslim, right? They all are based in Abrahamic faith and come from that um the root, the same root. So the feminine is completely diminished, right? We have Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We don't have Isis, Osiris, and Horus. We don't have mother, father, child. We have Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, but Mary, well, she was a virgin. That's a mystery. We don't understand it. And it was taken to be literal. However, I think because they really, because it is an overlay of the same, um, it's a recycling of, the solar myth, basically, uh, astrotheology, whatever. But people at that time couldn't handle the fact, and we didn't have temple prostitutes anymore. Weird. So weird. But I thought that was interesting. Pope Francis and Mary Untier of Knots. So the role of Mary in untying the knot, and the knot being El Risha, and that being the point of the spring solar eclipse. So isn't that sort of a doesn't that kind of give you an idea that the root, or like the trigger, in a sense, of the dividing of separate ideologies and ways of thinking in terms of spiritual versus material, um, that knot would be severed. Let's say it's severed, but we could say it was triggered. Definitely triggered by the eclipse in the spring on that star, on that knot. But at any rate, what it's doing is it's making it more black and white, right? Black and white is duality. We live in a dualistic world. The obvious differences are like night and day between people who are or are not awake, like really awake, spiritually awake, or who even care, um, and people who are not, who are just walking the path of Dumuzi. Um, but it's also maybe on a deeper level. Um, it's like it's sorted the awake from the not awake. And now the awake are sitting on the sidelines watching the not awake who have further divided. Okay. So the divide, we could look at the the April eclipse as being the divide, and we are 6 months out in the harvest season, and we're looking at the further divide, which is just, I mean, I look at it and I wonder, like, when people's heads are gonna explode because it's like they're like totally opposite one another, the two sides, and they don't realize that it is the same hydra, right? It's the triple, the three-headed hydra, but it's the same snake, right? It's crazy. So the snake is fighting against the snake. I don't know. It's just weird. And then, you just don't want to jump into the fray. It's not my fight to fight at all. So, yeah. Anyway, back to what is coming on the 19th. I do not know. I was also seeing that constellation of Ara, the altar, the fire, the Holocaust, the sacrifice, is connected to another underworld god that I have discussed, a judge of the dead, Orcus. And the asteroid Orcus is right now in Virgo, and it was triggered by the Mercury retrograde conjunction to the sun, I believe, or maybe it's now at that point. I I thought that this was interesting. It's just the moon that's passing through here, but it made me think that it could be a foreshadowing of what comes a few months from now when we have the transits going through Sagittarius. So let me just see where Orcus is. I believe I am correct about it being in Virgo. Yeah, it's at 16 degrees of Virgo with Siva and DNA being at 14 in Virgo, and Orcus being at 16 with a fetus. Yeah, those are kind of sub characters and sub context right now. Because we don't really have anything going through Virgo except for when the moon goes through there. I'm just thinking about the moon squaring the asteroids, but that's like super minor. We'll have to see what happens when Sag comes out, but we might actually see that being triggered later into October because transits through Scorpio will sextile to Virgo. Anyway, I'm just bringing that up just because Ara came up and I was looking at the 19th specifically, and that's where the moon will be in Sagittarius. and Orca. Orcus. Sorry, Orcus. Yeah, Orcus being a judge and one who judges breakers of oaths. You know, what is kind of interesting is that if you look at people who were born in the early mid 60s, they have the Pluto Uranus conjunction at 14 degrees of Virgo. So those people would be about, I don't know, 60 years old or so. If they were born like in 63. Um, and this is actually very impactful because what are we seeing right now? Like um, Robert Kennedy Jr. running as an independent for president. And so that kicks up all of the talk about the assassination of Kennedy. And people born in the early 60s who have that Virgo conjunction of Uranus and Pluto, two generational planets that impact society, and they were conjunct at that time. I mean that's pretty crazy. And what did that assassination bring? It brought death and sudden subverting and diverting of the path basically for humanity and specifically for our nation. But the transits that happened over the summer with Mercury retrograde and the Sun conjunction and conjuncting Orcus, a fetus, and now DNA reaching that degree will be very impactful, obviously, for people who have that conjunction, um, born in the 60s. And it's also a judging of sorts because Orcus is judging and a fetus is criminal networks and people who are guilty by association, just like I've talked about before. So I think it's very interesting. I haven't looked at RFK Jr.'s chart. I don't know what he is or what his placements are. Um, but yeah, I mean, he would have been born around that time too, so he probably has that conjunction. So he is here to, and again, DNA, isn't that interesting? Having his DNA activated to have him step into a role to continue perhaps the work of his father, his uncle, um, continuing their legacy and maybe getting some exposure. I mean, there's so many books out there. I mean, I think we probably kind of already know. And it did have to do with criminal networks and organizations within our government. So that is something that's going to be more prominent. Maybe with the next retrograde, because we had that retrograde of Mercury in Virgo, and I think the next one, if I'm not mistaken, is in Capricorn. Capricorn's government and ancestry and the father. Let's see. Yeah, it is. It's in Capricorn. Yay. In my sign. But anyway, Let's see. Did I forget anything? Did I miss anything? Al-Qaid, let's talk about that again. I said that particular star in Ursa Major at 27 degrees of Virgo is known as the destroyer of nations in Islamic astrology. Very interesting. And what was I talking about? But every time we had an opposition to Neptune, we had big reveals, like big stuff was happening. Um, Starting with Mars opposing Neptune. Mars opposing Neptune, Neptune being, let's say, the religious ideologies and the root of all of that, but also, religious war being Mars. So Mars in late August opposed Neptune first. So unless we were like balls deep in studying and looking at international politics in the Middle East, like I know, like my attention was here in the US on what was going on. If were to look back, I'm sure I would get a lot of clues, but that's just not where I was at the time. Um, but every time we've had these oppositions to Neptune, we've seen more and more of the deception and the delusion and I don't know, like the religious stuff coming up. Retrograde first. And late September, early October, that's probably when we would have seen like stuff starting to happen in the Middle East with yeah, right. Okay. Before the actual attack on the 7th, Mars was at the South Node. That's war, attack, fighting, terrorism, sort of stuff. And Mercury would have been on um, Al-Qaid. Al-Qaid. So the next aspect to that star, the next conjunction to that star, is when Venus in Virgo. So I would expect that, yeah, I mean, we'll see things happening. I think there probably will be little skirmishes here and there, but it really feels like the next amp up. Let's see, how far is that off of the eclipse? Well, we have the eclipse on the 28th in Taurus, and let me see the aspects. 28 degrees, I'm sorry, 28 October, the sun at 5 and the moon at 5, wait, the sun at 5 Scorpio, the moon at 5 Taurus. The aspects that the moon is making, it's sextiling to Saturn before the eclipse. Saturn will go direct in early November, the first week of November, and that will be an intense time. Anytime planets go retrograde or direct, um, I would see sort of a strengthening of resolve leading up to the eclipse itself, I mean, that very day, it feels like, I don't know, do they have a truce, a ceasefire? Well, again, apply this to your own life. Is it a pause? Is it a realization? Is it an ending of a cycle? Does it have to do with money, assets, finances, debts, taxes, whatever? We're talking about Taurus Scorpio themes or an ending of, an association, whatever your themes were. Again, as I had mentioned, the Taurus stuff is over. The the nodes going through North Node going through Taurus, South Node in Scorpio, whatever that brought up for you, the merging of finances or the dividing of finances, that this represents that cycle too, a peak, a culmination. So, or whatever, it could be like uh the personal work, sorry, that we were doing around that, whatever it was for you. Um, but I mean, that day of the full moon, because it's a Taurus moon, it almost feels like it's pretty like chill. And because the moon's making a sextile to Saturn, which is stabilizing and feels pretty okay. So maybe it's like a pause, but then we have the 29th, and then the moon will go over Jupiter, oppose Mars and Mercury. So I see the day after the eclipse and the subsequent day to be a little more interesting. But we'll talk more about that as we get closer. Um, but I'm glad I got all that out as far as the connections to Virgo and the star Heze and, you know, all of the goddess lineage, Inanna, all the way down to Mary, who apparently unties knots, or so I hear. You'll have to ask the Pope about that. What's up with that? I tried to find some information about Mary Untier of Knots online, but they have a web page. You can look it up. But as far as our relation to this sort of process, because what do we get from the the story? What is the allegory telling us when we're talking about you know, whether it's Inanna or Persephone and descent into the underworld? That is our delving into our subconscious or the unconscious, and having to it's the idea of having to give up our attachments to the material, right? Material realm. And here are some other thoughts on that particular allegorical story as it relates to descent. It made me think of abductions and NDEs, and I keep saying that like for such a long time we didn't hear about alien abductions, and now I'm starting to hear people talk about it on podcasts. Maybe I wasn't hearing about it, but I think it's going to become uh more talked about, um because we have to deal with that. And what is that? Like, who's doing that? I have my ideas. Um so anyway, descent into the underworld. Uh, Spiritual death and rebirth, obviously destruction, suppression of the feminine principle, and because also the aspect that we have coming up, Mars squared Pluto, and that was very destructive. Um, we have coming up on the 20th, a few days from now, after the 19th, which I still don't. It's an ending. I told you. It's the 9-day. We'll see what happens. I think that if you look at the trajectory of whatever it is, whatever cycle, 9-day cycle you're working with, it changes. The dynamic changes at the very least. But on the 20th would be the 1 day, and we have the Sun and Mercury, which have already passed the South Node. The South Node, you can look at that in terms of what I was talking about with Persephone and Inanna and going through the gates and having to give things up. So it's releasing attachments, releasing things every time something goes over the South Node, right? Releasing our anger. That was Mars going over the South Node, and that's when war erupted. So the Sun and Mercury going over the South Node over the next few days. Let's see. The Sun is there now. So it is the Sun. It's the identity. It's the ego. It's the leader. It's the purpose, life spark of life, the solar energy, and a release point, obviously, because it's conjunct the South Node. And then on the 19th, Mercury will be there. So then that is communications. I mean, that's the mind, obviously. That's the analytical, logical principle. And whatever it is that we hear on that day, or the declarations that are made. And the Sun is squaring Pluto. And on the 20th, they're both squaring Pluto. That's pretty intense. It's an intense time. Sun square Pluto is change, transformation. It's like change or die, transform or die. It's going to feel like it is just, could be very gut wrenching for people. Where we recognize perhaps where our fears are coming from, our obsessions, our need to control, our fear of death, our resistance to transformation. There's a change a coming. So that will be an important day also. Sun and Mercury square Pluto. It could be an announcement of someone's passing, a leader, maybe. I mean, I keep talking about assassinations, and it is possible. However, I mean, we are dealing also with a strange, funky aspect to Neptune. So, what's real? What's true? And how does this news affect people? That's definitely an important factor. But the moon will be in Cancer. I'm sorry, Cancer. The moon will be in Capricorn that day. Moon in Capricorn on the 20th. But on the 19th, we have the moon square to Neptune. I feel like some deception and lies will come to light, perhaps. Um, it'll be interesting. Mark the 19th down. Again, that's the 9-day. So yeah, jeez. So the moon will be sextile to Mercury and the sun. That is a leader, someone in charge making an announcement. We're dealing with Sagittarius moon. That's definitely having to do with either, well, and the moon is square to Neptune. So it could have to do with some kind of religious, ecclesiastical thing. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But it all looks very, very interesting. Okay, that's all I have to say on that subject. I'll leave the rest for another day. In my future podcasts, I probably will want to look at Ananan as an asteroid and Magdalena, because there are asteroids named after the two of them. I never did find a Dumuzi, but I mean, he wouldn't be hard to find in some archetypal story, in some other asteroid of masculine fuckery. Anyway. Yeah, so we will talk about Ananan. Ananan is at 1 Leo, and it's in conjunct to Saturn, which is retrograde. Saturn is conjunct asteroid karma. I'm going to make a note of that. Hopefully, I see it in my notes so I can talk more about it for you. And then Magdalena. Ooh, yeah. Okay. We will talk about this. So Magdalena is retrograde and she's at 29 degrees of Aquarius and Saturn is at 0 degrees of Pisces. So they're basically conjunct and they're both retrograde. Now I need to look at the retrograde cycle of those two. It's Magdalena. We're going to look at Magdalena and Saturn. And Ananan, because what I basically gave you was a history as we know it, or as I could, the best that I could find out or see, um, in terms of the many faces of the goddess principle and the feminine and her many names throughout each particular epoch, starting with Sumeria. I don't know of any earlier written records. If I think there is something. I remember seeing something, but I don't think there's too much information about whatever it was that came before the Sumerian civilization and their writings. But maybe that is something to go into in the future. And because it's all right there. I mean, the other asteroids that I've pointed out that have been within the degrees of the eclipse involving Isis, just another name. That's another face of the goddess. That was in Egypt. We know that, right? Um, and then Persephone, both of those asteroids, and Lilith, first wife of Adam, all hovering around the degrees of this solar eclipse. And I won't forget to mention asteroid Didymus. And Didymus, as I've spoken about in previous podcasts, I have looked at this asteroid as the dualistic mind, right? The sort of compartmentalization and disassociation and the duality, and split personalities, twins, because it is Didymus means twin, and its moon is dimorphous, which just means existing in two states, right? And what do we have going on? The two-state solution. And it's fighting against one another because the mind being fractured is not integrated and whole. The consciousness and the ego, without being connected to the spirit and the soul, is not whole. And so it is the conflict where there is lack of integration and not apartheid. Separate, but not apartheid. I think it's all very interesting, don't you? So, Didymus is showing that it is instrumental here. It's active. It's showing me its meaning through what is going on in the external realm, and how Didymus is, like we're seeing it in real time, causing a fracture. A fracture. And also the fact that ISIS is the name of a terrorist group, and that is so anti-Christ. It's not funny, right? But taking the name of a sacred feminine concept of the goddess part, the feminine part, counterpart of God, and using that as a name. Like, this is how they invert everything. It is an attack on the feminine principle. It is not just an attack on, I mean, we see those particular cultures suppressing females. That's the exoteric. But what they suppress is the feminine principle, which is, in order to do the things that they do, they have to have no empathy. That's feminine. Suppressing putting the masculine above all and not listening to feminine intuition, glorifying the material and suppressing the spiritual, the pursuit of success, material success, and the exclusion of your heart, your spirit, the the ability to love and be vulnerable. So, yes. What else can we say about all of that? Yeah. Anyway, I feel like it's going to get darker before it gets lighter. But as the dark gets darker, the light does get lighter. And this battle is only just beginning. It's only, I mean, whatever. It's been going on longer than we know. This is the ancient battle. But it is intensifying and bringing us to the realization of the need to have some sort of a spiritual life, some sort of a connection to to God, to spirit, to something beyond ourselves, or the realization of ourselves as being something more than just what we see reflected in the physical, and also to be able to look and discern the signs of the times, the symbols, and recognizing who's on what side, who is being jumped into the gang. Like, what gang are they representing? Because it's all gang. But we have our own gang, so that's cool. All right. Well, it's been another 3-hour dissertation. But I think this one was a little bit more um, to the point. Took me a long time to get there, but I had my notes. So now I have laid the foundation for things that I don't have to explain as much going forward. Maybe I'll pin this up as a primer to everything going forward, because it's a lot. And astrology gives us an idea of where we are in time and space and lets us know that we have a way to discern the quality of that time and where our focus should be, which is on ourselves first and foremost. Take care of you, stay on your path. It's nice when other people join along and, you're kind of on the ride together, but we got to travel light these days. We have to travel light because, there really was a time when we sort of needed to move slower, wait for others to catch up. But I think that's past. I think we're done with that. So, again, everyone's situation is individual and different. Use discernment in wherever you're at. You do what you can and leave the rest up to grace because it is there for us to access. And it is in the it is in the trials and tribulations that we understand what it means to access grace and to live in a state of perpetual grace, which is miracles. It's magic and miracles. I've seen it. I've been there. It's a place that I live on the daily, and um, it's fun. It's magic. It's synchronicity. It's really wonderful. Yes, but you, sometimes we have to go through times that throw us off balance. And this is right now, but like this is the spiritual yoga. And I don't mean downward dog, I mean practice of being able to stay in balance, to be able to have one foot in the world and one foot in another dimension. We have to be able to observe what's going on, but it's the practice of yoga that helps us to be able to not be affected or not stay out of balance too long, and to be able to transmute quickly the fear, the anger, the grief, and knowing how far we've come in healing is indicative of how long we can stay in those states, or how long we pass through them, those gates and states. Okay. Whew. Can't believe I haven't peed in 3 hours. That's because I'm not drinking water, I drink, therefore I pee. Who's still with me? Lynn is here because Lynn's a good girl. Thank you, Lynn. Oh, I can't scroll. I can't scroll on the chat, but I did see what you were putting in the chat room, Lynn. I see you. Lynn, your father worked with NASA? Tell me more. That's pretty cool. Something about the moon landing, 1962. You probably have that Pluto-Uranus conjunction in your chart, Lynn, in Virgo, based on what you've told me. But next time we do readings on the air, Lynn is first in line. So let it be known there's Lynn, and then there's everyone that comes behind her. She will have her reading first. Okay, I gotta get out of here. I don't know why I can't scroll the chat. Okay, dudes, thank you as always for participating in my madness and sticking around. And whoever listens in the after archives, I am much grateful to you also. Please hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that also. And ring my bell so that you will get notifications when I go live, which is normally around noon o'clock Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. And this closes out the Tuesday transmission of Astro Lunatic's Guide to the Universe. I hope you found it educational and informatory, and hopefully I was able to convey whatever news reports I am receiving from Galactic Center. Okay, ciao for now.